Okay, Shalom. We are now on our next video. This is the time period called the Tanaim. Okay, the Tanaim means anyone who lived during the time period that would their time period, anything they said would be written down in the Mishnah. Okay, so anybody that's in the Mishnah, and you have to remember this is an important point, anyone that's written down the Mishnah is called a Tana. I want you to remember that. Okay, anyone written down the Mishnah is called a Tana. Okay, Tanas in plural is Tanaim. Okay, and that's who these people were. All of their opinions were written down in the Mishnah. Now, at the end of the time period of Tanaim, there's somebody called Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is one of the greats, one of the giants. We call him as a short-term Rabbeinu. That's how important to us, Rabbeinu HaKodesh, our sacred rabbi, our sacred teacher, and he really had a significant change on the Jewish people. Why? Because until that time, you weren't allowed to publish. You could write down your own notes that you learned, but you weren't allowed to publish en masse works of the Torah Shabbal Peh, of the oral law, those principles you were not allowed to write down. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi felt that because of the persecution happening against the Jewish people, this is the time that the Romans are in Yerushalayim, they're encircling the base of Mikdash and they're about to destroy it. So he felt that at this time period, we're not going to be able to keep the Torah Shabbal Peh, these principles going, just simply by people telling other people and them writing their own notes. We've got to publish something. This was forbidden until this time. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, under a principle called Eis Lasos Lashem, which is a difficult principle to understand, but essentially says that if the entire Torah is going to be forgotten, you can violate the Torah in order to save it. It's not for you and I to decide when that happens. You have to have what we call broad shoulders. You have to be a tremendous scholar to make that decision. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi does, and he writes down the Mishnah. And that was what was so dramatic about writing down the Mishnah, was that it was the first time that the oral law is written down. What's written down in the Mishnah? It's the debates and the discussions between all the Tanaim. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi took his notes from the previous 7 generations and the notes that he had gotten from other people, and he writes down what's called the Mishnah. The Mishnah are essentially one paragraph pieces of work. There are 6 parts to the Mishnah. Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, that's important to know. 6 parts to the Mishnah. Okay, Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, 6 parts to it. And he writes them down. Each of the parts of the Mishnah have what's called a Masechta to it. Okay, so 6 parts. The 6 parts have Masechtas. Okay, so remember, so imagine 6 parts. Okay, you have Zerayim, Moed, Nashim, Nezikim, Kachim, and Taros, and the 6 parts all have different Masechtas. You've probably heard the names of the Masechtas: Brachos, Shabbos, Eruvin, Psachim, Bava Basra, Bava Kama. Those are all Masechtos as part of the larger Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Okay, now, the Jewish people during this time, as Yerushalayim is encircled, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is given a wish by the Romans because they're so impressed with him, and he asks for them to save the scholars and move them out to a city called Yavna. So the scholars leave Yerushalayim, and for the first time, really, our center base is not in Yerushalayim anymore, and our Sanhedrin and our leaders move out to Yavna. Okay, you can answer the questions now.